So at last, my opportunity. And I thought that I would look back rather than look forward. Everybody else has looked forward and talked about technology an awful lot. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the past. And I'm interested in something that George Bernard Shaw said in 1903. He said that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world, and the unreasonable one seeks to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, he concluded, all progress depends upon unreasonable people. And yet we seem to be at a time now where we have lots of progress, lots of change. We need unreasonable people to provoke that change. But they tend not to get the opportunity. And I brought a few things along with me from home to talk about, because I thought that would be more interesting than talking about technology that I don't understand. And thinking about our schools and how our schools like to get kids to conform and be the same. The whole system is around this sort of sausage machine that you go through from the age of like 4 to university. And one thing that Norfolk is really good at, as I read in the EDP the other day, one thing we're second best in the country at, is excluding the kids who are different. So here I have some kids in my box. Here's one who's different. Rather than supporting that different kid, we chuck them. Shocking, isn't it? And it happens all the time. And it's kind of a concern, I guess, because if we need unreasonable people, why are we excluding them? And it's no wonder that Norfolk's 10 special schools are heavily oversubscribed. Because they don't fit, they're not going to hit the exam results, therefore they're out the door. Professor Danny Dorling, the geographer, who writes some interesting stuff in The Guardian, wrote about the fact that we measure everything around young people today. We measure every aspect of their performance. And yet, if you look at this, if you look at the UK performance against the 25 richest nations in the world, we're pretty near the bottom. So perhaps rather like Adrian Mole, who measured something and it never changed in size at all, are we measuring the right things, I ask myself? Should we be measuring different things around young people, around attitude, around what they want to do, rather than the exam results? Which kind of brings me to a personal experience. So I met a lady called Anne from Hertfordshire. He has a double-barreled surname, which I won't repeat because I will mumble and spoil it. But this lady called Anne was at the University of Hertfordshire, and she did a PhD. Her PhD subject was why do bright kids do badly at school? Interesting subject, yeah. And I was one of 10 in-depth case studies she did. She wrote up as part of her PhD. And what was interesting from her PhD was she did some analysis around the education system in the UK. And it's geared to meet the needs of kids in the IQ range 110 to 125. Now, she reckoned that if you were more than 15 points either side of that, 95, 140, you had special needs. Now, if your IQ is 95 or below, being honest, you tend to stand out a little bit, and you get picked up, and you get supported, and you go to special school. If your IQ is about 140, you don't get noticed. And she called high IQ the hidden learning disability. Now I've had my IQ measured at 155 by Mensa, and therefore I come to the conclusion of the realization that I have had, all my life, a hidden learning disability. And that puts into context a lot of the stuff I did at school or didn't do, the fact that I ricocheted around the system and sort of fell out at the other end, untouched by anything academic. And I find that quite sad, and I see that happening today as much as it did in my day. And the other thing that she noticed from her PhD, looking at my props here to see which one goes next, the thing that was interesting, and this is a broken head, and we've talked about mental health already so far. So what was interesting was that amongst a sample of high IQ people she sampled, who did a survey across the UK, about 30% admitted to having had mental health problems, and I'm one of that 30%. If you talk to people who work in special education, the kids at the special schools, around 30% of kids with a learning disability also have mental health problems. Which says to me that if we're trying to push people through the middle and we're rejecting them because they don't fit, then actually that's messing them up. And actually that seems quite sad and quite wrong. And so perhaps we need to change the system. Because the fact is that people Some of the people who have done the most amazing things in history have not done well at school. They've dropped out, they failed. So my next prop is my trusty iPhone. And somebody already mentioned Alexander Graham Bell today as being the guy responsible for creating the telephone. And what was interesting when you read about Alexander Graham Bell's history in Edinburgh, where he grew up, he was home taught for the first 11 years of his life. At 11, he went to a high school where he did very badly. At 15, he dropped out. No exams, no nothing. At 19, he started corresponding with a scientist in Germany. And bear in mind, this was like a long time ago, so he wasn't emailing the guy, he was writing and waiting for the postman. He was communicating with this guy in Germany who was researching around transmission of sound, which is what he was particularly interested in. Now, Alexander Graham Bell's fascination with sound wasn't because he'd been told to focus on STEM at school. It wasn't because somebody pushed him into a degree to study physics and the nature of sound. It was because his mum was deaf. He wanted to make it easy for her to communicate. And you speak to kids that are different, particularly the higher end of the IQ range, who don't fit. They're motivated by something which often is very fundamentally good and wholesome, but which doesn't kind of resonate with the people who are trying to measure them against this criteria, this curriculum they're being forced through. Which makes me think a little bit about academies, and there's, again, the announcement this week about every school being an academy by 2022. And yesterday, in the Eastern Daily Press, Martin George was writing about the fact that parent governors are kind of optional with academies. And Danny Doring, again, in The Guardian, was saying that the academies is kind of the unelected accountable to a Secretary of State. So where's the control sit? And why is there so much controversy around academies right here in the city of Norwich? And bizarrely, that made me think about chicken pies, because I have one here. And that film, the Wallace and Gromit film, Chicken Run, where the farmer's wife decided that she made more money making chicken pies than selling eggs, and the hens got a bit upset about this because they didn't really want to be turned into chicken pies. And zooming over the fence came this saviour, they thought, called Rocky. Rocky could fly, and they couldn't. If you remember the film, they spent ages in the film trying to work out how to fly to copy Rocky and escape this horrible fate of being jammed between two pieces of pastry and heated up to an intolerable temperature. And what they found, their horror later, what they discovered was that Rocky actually was from a circus. And a misaimed circus cannon had catapulted him over the fence into the pound. So it was all a sham. I just wonder how much of this academy rhetoric is just that. It isn't real. It is kind of wishful thinking by people that, frankly, perhaps don't know as much about it as you guys do here in the room. Which, in a way, brings me now to my journey, which is perhaps where I could have started. So I've been introduced as having started the social business around helping bright kids who drop out of school to measure their performance by working with small businesses. And I think there's a lesson for all of us in that kind of journey that you go through. So for me, it followed that trajectory, that famous Gandhi quote. So first, I was ignored. I know nothing about apprenticeships. I'm not from the education world. I don't understand this sort of stuff, people were saying, so just go away. And then I started to get some traction, and people started to laugh at me, to ridicule me, to throw big documents at me. I had enough PDF files to sink a ship, and I read none of them. But we got traction. We got some grants from the county council. We got some help from housing associations. We started to get more things happening. We got investment from Big Issue Invest. And then people start to fight you. So the first step is they fight you. And when they fight you, you start to get bad press, misquoted in the press. Things start to happen. We got dumped by a training provider at short notice. And that's not very good either. And then finally, when you hang in there and keep going, you kind of win. But you don't win in one big lump. You win in steps. Because victory is never total, it's never absolute. It gets easier. The battles become slightly lesser, and the victories become slightly bigger as you go along. And so that really brings me to my own 2 feet, which is about where you just keep going and keep pushing, and you just have to tread carefully, because that's a funny old world out there. And the last exhibit I have is my trainer, or a trainer, because I'm also one of a local lad, James Dyson, who went to school at Gresham's, where his dad used to teach classics. Dyson did badly at school as well. And what he attributes his success to isn't the education he got at Gresham's, a place that many kids would aspire to go to, but the determination he gained as a distance runner. So the fact that he kept going when everybody told him to stop is what gave him that breakthrough to develop that Hoover that we all know and love. And maybe you shouldn't call it a Hoover anymore, but call it a Dyson. And so I guess my message is that if you see things you don't like the look of, just keep going through those stages. Accept the fact that people will ignore you. Then they'll kind of they'll laugh at you a bit, and then they'll attack you. But then finally, you'll win through. So take your shoes and socks off, get started, and do it right now.